Have you ever heard of an HOA so obsessed with rules that they'd turn Christmas joy into a legal nightmare? Well, let me tell you about the time one family left their holiday lights up just a week too long and ended up in a battle that nearly cost them their home. It started with the Benson family, a kind-hearted couple, Greg and Hannah, and their two young kids, Lily and Mason. They lived in a suburban neighborhood where every house looked neat and uniform, thanks to their HOA, the Silver Pines Association. For years, Greg and Hannah had played along with the rules: neatly trimmed lawn, mailbox painted the approved shade of brown, even the specific type of shrubbery the HOA required. But Christmas? Christmas was their one time to let loose. Greg went all out every December, stringing lights across the roofline, wrapping the trees with bright strands, and setting up a glowing snowman on the front lawn. Hannah baked cookies for the neighbors, and their kids loved the tradition of lighting everything together. Their house was a beacon of joy in a neighborhood that sometimes felt too stiff. That December had been no different. The Bensons' display was modest compared to some houses you might see on TV shows, but in Silver Pines it was the brightest around. The whole street glowed at night, and cars would occasionally slow down to admire the cheerful scene. Even neighbors who rarely smiled found themselves pausing to enjoy the warm light in the cold evenings. But when January rolled around, Greg got busy with work deadlines, Hannah had her hands full with the kids, and taking down the decorations just didn't happen right away. By the second week of January, the lights were still up. They weren't turned on at night anymore, just quietly hanging across the gutters, waiting for Greg to finally get a Saturday free. That's when the first letter arrived. It was a stiff, cold notice from the Silver Pines HOA addressed to the occupants of 125 Maple Lane. It read, "Dear residents, in accordance with Silver Pines' seasonal display policy, all holiday decorations must be removed by January 7th. Your property remains in violation. You are hereby fined $50. Each additional day of non-compliance will result in further fines." Greg laughed when he read it. $50 for lights that weren't even turned on anymore? He shrugged it off, telling Hannah, "It's ridiculous. I'll get them down next weekend. They'll live." But the HOA wasn't laughing. Within days, the fines started stacking. Another letter arrived, then another. The tone grew sharper. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. Current balance, $250. Final warning before legal escalation, current balance, $450. By the end of the month, the Bensons were stunned to see that their total owed had ballooned past $700, all because of some wires and plastic still attached to their house. Hannah wanted Greg to just take them down immediately, but he was getting stubborn. "It's not about the lights anymore. It's about principle. They can't bully us like this." He insisted he'd take care of it when he was good and ready. Meanwhile, the HOA board was in overdrive. The president, a sharp-tongued woman named Marlene Withers, made the Bensons her personal crusade. At the next HOA meeting, she singled them out. "These repeated violations undermine the community's standards," she declared, waving copies of the letters. "If we allow one family to ignore the rules, soon every house will look like a circus. Silver Pines has a reputation to uphold." Some neighbors nodded along, afraid to speak against her, but others quietly muttered that it was silly to obsess over a few lights in January. Then came the knock at the door. Greg opened it to find an HOA compliance officer standing stiffly on the porch, clipboard in hand. He snapped photos of the dangling lights, noted the date, and handed Greg yet another warning. "If these aren't removed within 48 hours, the association will pursue legal action." Greg's jaw clenched. "You've got to be kidding me. They're just lights. They're off. They're harmless." The officer simply shrugged. Rules are rules. By mid-February, the fines had ballooned to over $1,200. The HOA had tacked on administrative fees and late charges, padding the total like a debt collector. Letters were now threatening a lien on the property. That's when Hannah started to panic. "Greg, this is getting serious. They're talking about taking legal action. What if they actually come after the house?" But Greg's frustration had hardened into defiance. "They won't. No judge in their right mind would side with them over Christmas lights. What Greg didn't know was that the HOA had already retained a lawyer, and Marlene was determined to make an example out of his family. In March, a formal notice of intent to file a lien arrived by certified mail. It spelled out in chillingly precise language that if the Bensons didn't pay $1,600 in accumulated fines and fees, the HOA could legally attach a lien to their property. That meant potential foreclosure. The stress weighed heavy on the family. Hannah barely slept, worrying about their savings. Greg grew tense and irritable, snapping at the kids. The once festive lights had become a symbol of dread, swaying in the spring breeze like mocking reminders of their fight. Finally, Greg gave in. One Saturday morning, he pulled out the ladder and spent hours pulling every last bulb, wire, and extension cord off the house. By afternoon, the yard was bare. He stood back, sweaty and furious, muttering, "There, happy now?" But the HOA wasn't done. That week, another letter came. Removal acknowledged, outstanding fines remain due, current balance $1,800. Hannah felt sick reading it. Even after we took them down, they still want the money? Greg clenched the letter in his fist. Not 1 cent. They're not getting a dime from us. They sought advice from a neighbor who was a paralegal. She told them something shocking. HOA fines can sometimes be unenforceable if the rules aren't clearly outlined in the bylaws. She offered to help draft a response letter. The Bensons sent back a firm, legal-sounding rebuttal. We dispute the validity of these fines as they are excessive, retaliatory, and not supported by the HOA's governing documents. Any attempt to file a lien will be met with legal defense. For the first time in weeks, Greg felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this would scare the HOA into backing off. But Marlene wasn't one to be intimidated. At the next board meeting, she declared, "We will not be mocked. If they won't pay, we will pursue collection through every legal avenue available." The war over holiday lights was about to explode into a courtroom battle. By April, the HOA's lawyer had filed paperwork with the county court. The Bensons received a summons. They were officially being sued by their HOA for unpaid fines. The case made waves through the neighborhood. Some neighbors were horrified that it had come to this. Others whispered that Greg should have just taken the lights down sooner. But when the local paper caught wind of the story, everything changed. "Family faces foreclosure over Christmas lights," the headline read. The article painted the HOA as a joyless Grinch, crushing holiday cheer with bureaucracy. The story spread online, sparking outrage. Comments poured in. "This is insane. Who fines people for Christmas lights? HOAs are out of control. I'd keep the lights up year-round just to spite them." Suddenly, Marlene and her board were on the defensive. At the first hearing, the judge raised an eyebrow at the HOA's case. "You're telling me you want to foreclose on a family's home over decorations that were up for 6 extra weeks?" The HOA's lawyer tried to argue community standards, but the judge wasn't impressed. He scolded them for wasting the court's time. While he didn't erase all the fines, he did rule that the lien attempt was invalid and threw out most of the penalties. The Bensons walked out of court relieved, though exhausted. They still had to pay a small administrative fee, but the nightmare was over. Afterward, the community turned against Marlene. At the next HOA election, she was voted out in a landslide. Residents were fed up with her iron fist rule and embarrassed by the negative publicity. As for the Bensons, they decided the fight had taught them a lesson, not about compliance, but about standing up for themselves. That Christmas, they put up their lights again, brighter than ever. Only this time, when January rolled around, Greg made sure to take them down by the 7th. Because while the HOA had lost the battle, the family knew one thing for certain: it wasn't worth another war over a few strands of twinkling lights. And so the neighborhood of Silver Pines learned a hard truth. Sometimes, the spirit of the holidays shines brighter than the strictest rules.